Let's see. Tonight, we are fortunate enough to have Forrest Rosenbauer here. Forrest he's actually a wildlife technician here in Region 3, but he is also now a graduate student at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And he is doing a project with Fish and Game and the university about bull moose movements in interior Alaska. And I think that's a pretty cool topic because we don't usually do a lot of research on bull moose in general. So it's a pretty fascinating topic, and hopefully he's going to get a lot out of this research. And down the road in the future, when he finalizes the results, maybe he'll come back and do it again if we learn something. So I'm going to hand it off to Forrest. Jan, if I missed anything, or Burl, if I missed anything, let me know before we get started. But otherwise, Forrest, I'm going to put it into your hands and let you go.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. It'll depend on how nice you guys are to me if I come back or not.
All right.
But as Mike said, I am Forrest Rosenbauer. I am a wildlife technician at Fish and Game here, as well as a current graduate student at UAF in the Human Dimensions of Wildlife Lab under Dr. Todd Brinkman. Thank you guys so much for coming and having me. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about moose movement, particularly interseasonal movement or between season movements of bull moose, in an attempt to answer the question of, are the moose that we count the moose that we hunt? Oh, let me get on this. There we go. So real quick, I want to run through what I'll be sharing with you guys today. First, I want to set the stage a little bit by going through some of the background and ecology of moose and the role that Fish and Game plays in their management. This will then get us to our methods for the study and a few early preliminary findings. And then finally, a quick discussion and some time for questions, hopefully. But before we dive in, I want to give a little caveat. I want to talk a little bit about the timeline we have for this project. It's still a current work in progress for sure. We conducted our first field season back in fall of 2023. And just finally this last fall collected a full year of data to start analyzing. We are still in the early phases of analysis, so everything I'm sharing tonight is very preliminary. Hopefully we can get some of the first publishable results around the fall of 2025. And then as we continue collecting more data with these collars, we'll continue to be able to refine our research and answer some new questions. And with that, we can jump right in. So to begin, I wanted to run through a couple of important points in moose ecology. In the interior here, we have Alces gigas, the variety of moose. It's the largest variety, which is pretty cool, with females weighing about 800 pounds on average and males getting up to around 1,600 pounds. So really, really large animals that we've got running around here. As far as food goes, in the summer, they like to focus on protein-rich foods like aquatic vegetation, like this guy here snorkeling around. They also like green leaves of willow and birch particularly. In the winter, they switch over to small twigs of hopefully willow and birch. That's their favorite. But if a winter is particularly rough or long, they'll slowly increase the diameter of twig that they're willing to eat, despite the fact that larger diameter of twigs aren't as nutritious as smaller diameter. And then a little bit on their breeding. Moose breed during the time called rut, which is usually where these relatively solitary animals tend to congregate a little bit more. It occurs in late September and early October and can result in a lot of behavior changes. From the few studies we have, it seems like cows tend to stop moving as much. They move a little bit less during this time frame, while bulls can move across the landscape move a little bit more across the landscape, excuse me, possibly to protect and access females for breeding season. Bulls this time of year also, interestingly, completely stop eating, kind of showing that they really only have one thing on their mind. So most of the studies we've done, I think Mike mentioned this a little bit earlier, have been on cows. There's a lot of really good reasons for this. Cows provide a ton of really good data, not only about themselves, but also about their calves. So when you get to collar a cow, you get information on not only them, but also information on the calves, like their weight, when they were born, their parturition date, and the twinning rates of these cows, which are all really good metrics of nutritional status of the population, which is something Fish and Game and managers are watching really closely. From the movement studies that have been done, again, mostly on cows, there seem to be a variety of movement strategies that they exhibit. Some moose are sedentary, meaning they have a specific home range that they're tied to all year. They stay in the same spot. Others disperse either to or from an area in different populations, which can create a source sink dynamic. And some are also migratory, meaning they spend part of the year in one spot, move to a second, and stay there for a bit until they return to the original area they are from. While some populations exhibit predominant strategies, it appears that a lot of populations have a mixture of what's selected. And that kind of covers the quick background I wanted to make sure people kind of understood about moose. And now I wanted to shift over and talk a little bit about the Alaska Department of Fish and Game and how their work has led to my specific question. Taking a broad look at ADF&G, as many of you know, they're the state agency that is in charge of managing wildlife in Alaska. Pulling directly from their mission statement, they're tasked with managing, protecting, maintaining, and improving wildlife populations and their habitat across the state. Their statement also includes aspects of conservation, economic development, and importantly, the principle of sustained yield. Now, to successfully do all those things we just listed, uh, managers have to have a lot of information about these populations that they're working with. This looks like stuff like life history traits, meaning reproductive rates or lifespans, age of maturity, when they can start breeding. It also includes harvest records, when and where these animals were harvested. We get these from harvest records that the public turns in, so we're really grateful for those. Population health is also really important, understanding if there's any diseases on the landscape, and then nutritional health, like using a metric like calf weight to understand that. We get these through sample collection and field work. And of course, we want population estimates. It's easiest to manage the population when you know about how many there are in the landscape. And that's where Fish and Game's aerial surveys come in. So many agencies, not just ADF&G, use survey for moose using small fixed-wing aircraft like this Piper Super Cub up at the top there. How it works, our survey specifically, first they overlay a grid system all across the landscape, kind of like the one on the bottom there. And then they select a certain subsection of those cells. These are alternately selected in that photo there. And they fly those cells and count the number of moose that are in there. With those numbers, you can get a really accurate estimate of the population at that time in that area. These surveys typically take place in early November to mid-December. This time frame is actually really, really important for a lot of different reasons, but maybe most important because we need to be able to see these animals. So we wait for the leaves to fall off the trees and snow to get on the ground. I'll show an example of that in a second. But we also want to try to catch them before their antlers drop, for the bull's antlers drop, excuse me, so we can get good demography data and understand the demography of the population. But of course, flying anywhere in Alaska, flying surveys in small fixed wings, and then having to have all these caveats of trying to be able to see these guys, it makes them very weather and condition dependent. And here's an example of those situations. So here are two different surveys conducted at different times of year. The left obviously is no snow, and there are two moose in this photo, a cow and a calf, which are really hard to see, but they are right there, right in the center. And contrast the visibility with the moose on the right, where these moose really pop. You see that brown on the white. And as you can see, conditions for these surveys are really, really important. And because conditions are important, then the timing of when we do these surveys are also really important. Now comes kind of the concern we have, the knowledge gap that we have. First, because most of the incredible amount of information we get comes from cows, there's a relative lack of emphasis on studying bulls. So our understanding of their behavior and their movement is much more limited, despite the fact that they're so incredibly important to hunters and people in general. We just don't know that much about them relatively. Second, like I mentioned, our population surveys take place in early winter. We do this to make sure, like I said, visibility is good and we can get an accurate count. But the management activity that is informed by those surveys, specifically hunting, right, takes place the following fall. And that's about 9 months that these guys have to alter their distribution, change their spread across the landscape, which can lead to the question at the heart of the study, which is, are we surveying the same bull moose that we hunt in the fall? If we are, great, no problem, right? We can keep doing business as usual until something else comes up that we have to deal with. But if we are actually inaccurately quantifying the huntable population, we might need to adjust what we're doing. Going back to the mission statement of Fish and Game, like I said earlier, their goal is to manage these populations in part in accordance with sustainable yield. And the best way to do that is to know what your huntable population is, so you can know what you can harvest off that population. So in order to answer this question accurately, Fish and Game and UAF came together and we decided to start a study. So these are our 3 study sites. We got really lucky and got 3. Fairbanks, the city of Fairbanks is over on the left side there, so just to orient yourself a little bit. Our first study site is Minto Flats, just to the west. Down in the southwest is McGrath, is our second study site, and then Galena, or the area above Galena, is our 3rd study site. We chose these 3 areas in cooperation with area managers, and in no small part due to the fact they have high harvest rates and have large moose populations. Now, before I go on to the next slide, because it's a video and I think it'll start playing right away, so I won't get a chance to give context. You're going to see a really short clip of what part of putting these collars out looks like. We dart bulls from a helicopter to sedate them, and we have 2 fixed wing planes flying over us to make sure to find new animals and to keep track of the animals we've already darted. So here it is. Okay, so hopefully that all went through. It looked great on my end, but hopefully it went through everybody else. But after we dart those, it's a really quick interaction from the air. But after we dart them, it usually takes about 5 to 8 minutes for them to relax and lay down. After they lay down, we land the helicopter and walk in. When we get to the moose, we first make sure it's comfortable, safe, and healthy. We then give it oxygen to keep its blood oxygen level up while it's sedated. We then put a collar on them really fast and take a couple measurements, like this antler width measurement that you can see we were taking. After we've done all that, we give them a drug reversal to get them back on their feet. And the whole process from the time that we get to the moose to the time we leave usually only takes about 5 minutes, so it's really, really fast. But we do stick around to make sure they get up, move off, and start trotting away. And for this study, we've put out 26 collars per site, and which adds up to a total of 78 collars. which is a really large number and we're really excited about. And this is what it looks like once we have them all out. So after the field work, you get a map like this with all the moose in their different study areas. Kind of the same orientation as earlier with Galena on the left, McGrath below it, and Minto Flats over there by Fairbanks. But if we zoom in, we start to get information like this. So each one of these dots is a GPS fixed point from the collar. The moose icon is itself the most recent location for each moose. Most of the year, we get points at about once every 6 hours or 4 per day. When hunting season and survey season, our GSP or our population survey that the state does rolls around, we want to get a little bit more precise data. So that changes to once every 2 hours or 12 times a day. So we have a really good data set on these guys' locations. Okay, so that's the data that we have, all those points, all those fixes, and now it's time to analyze. We just started this process, but the first step to any good analysis in my mind is go back to your basic research question and say, how can I answer this question in an empirical, falsifiable way that'll give me a good answer? So let's go back to that question again. That question, remember, is are we surveying the bull moose that we hunt in the fall? That's a pretty broad question. It could be hard to nail down where to go from or go to from there. But if we focus on how Fish and Game and the general public might be thinking about it, we can transform that question into something a little bit simpler, like does hunting accessibility change between seasons? Meaning, do these populations change their distribution across the landscape relative to hunter accessibility? Are they becoming more or less accessible between seasons, between the survey season and the following hunting season? And is there something we should be accounting for if they do? So this is our analysis that we decided to go with. The first step is we have to define accessibility, right? And to us, accessibility is whether a moose is able to be hunted by somebody in the area. So what we did was created a buffer, and this is again the 3 study sites, the same orientation, around all the rivers and trails and access points in the study area. And these are meant to represent accessible areas. So if a moose's GPS point was inside one of these buffers, at that time they would be considered accessible. If it was outside one of those buffers, we would consider it relatively less accessible or inaccessible. So that's step 1. Step 2 is to take those GPS points that we had and estimate the seasonal space use for each moose. So this is an example of a winter space use from bull moose number 1. It has a relatively dispersed space use that's kind of spread out with a few hot spots where it likely spent a little bit more time. So that's our second step. And our third step is to take those space use estimates and overlay our buffer. And that's what those squiggly black lines represent, is the access buffers. Once they're overlaid on those space use estimates, we calculate the probability that a moose occurred inside that buffer in that season. And you can see this moose has a pretty low probability of occurrence inside those buffers, with only a little bit of their space use distribution existing inside that buffer. So once we have those, we finally take those estimates for each moose in each season and compare them and see if there's a general change between seasons. Here's again bull moose number 1 from the winter of 23, relatively dispersed again. And then in the fall, the next fall of 24, their space use tightens up and it's a little bit more concentrated. This is the step that I'm on right now, trying to analyze this, so I won't have any specific answers about exactly how space use shifts. But we do have some pretty fun, I think, and interesting preliminary results, Results like this. So this is an example of a moose and their movement path. You can see how they started over on the northeast there, and then they moved over 60 kilometers, which I think is pretty astounding in terms of distance. Spent some time down there and then moved right back to their original spot. This is the type of behavior that we hope to capture in this study is kind of what are these moose actually doing? And this is, I think, a really cool example. On the other side of it, and again, these are both year-long videos of what's going on. So in a year, one moved 60. This guy only moved 6 kilometers. They aren't moving nearly as far during that year, but their data is a little bit messier, but hopefully we'll be able to estimate any change in space use using our analysis methods. And one of the final things we've been doing is we took all the collared moose from one of our herds and mapped their seasonal distribution in both fall on the left there and winter on the right. I find this figure tremendously interesting since the overall distribution doesn't seem to have any coherent shifts one way or the other or anything like that, but it does have some marked differences and changes in distribution. So analyzing this figure or figures like this is our next step to understand how these populations are moving around. Unfortunately, we still have a ways to go before we can really answer this question about how they're moving. But I was really excited to share this and show the people the kind of work we're doing. But that's not all the work we're doing with these color data. These data provide a ton of really valuable information, and they'll last for years to come. So we're going to get a bunch more. So we've been talking about interseasonal or between season movement. But we're also interested in looking at intra-seasonal or within a season and seeing how those shorter term movements change. We'd also love to be able to parse out what variables influence movement. There's a lot of data out there about these factors like snow depth and vegetation availability or forage availability. But we're creating a data set of bull moose that is really, really big and high quality. So we hopefully will be able to illuminate the answers to those questions a little bit better, specifically for bull moose. And finally, something that we've kind of added on at the end that we're really excited about is we've been collecting data on the periods of antler drop for these guys. And I'm not sure, I can't see what the answers to our polls were, but we found a surprising early answer or early drop date from some of these moose. Our first flight out there, moose had already dropped their antlers, and we went out in mid-November. So it's not inconceivable that they had started to drop their antlers in early November, which is something that we weren't expecting, and I don't think a lot of people did. Hopefully, in terms of outcomes, by the time we have all this data sorted out, we'll have some pretty exciting answers for how our surveys can inform management. Hopefully, we'll be able to educate hunters on survey processes and how it relates to hunting. We'll be able to inform our surveys about the data gaps that we have and that we might have. And most importantly, we can improve our management schemes in order to more efficiently manage this incredibly important resource to Alaskans and make sure we keep it around for a long time. That was pretty quick. That's all I've got for you, though. Just real briefly, I'd like to thank my committee, Todd, Graham, and Sean for all the help you've given me, and then Elaine, Danny, Lincoln, and Mark for all the advice. So with that, I'd be happy to open it up to some questions if anybody has any.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Horace. We do have some questions in the chat. I could read those out to you. And
Sure.
Number one, I don't know if you want to answer this, or we could also get another manager online to use their mic if they want to chime in, but have you considered using drones for surveys, for moose surveys?
I can't speak to if any manager has considered it. I've thought about it a little bit, and this is just as me. Drones right now are a little bit tricky for a couple of reasons. First, the FAA regulations around drones require that they remain in line of sight. So you have to be in visual communication with your drone, which given the amount of area we're trying to cover with these surveys, it'd be almost impossible. The other aspect is battery life. Like I said, even if we get the FAA to say it's fine, we'd struggle to do the amount of surveying we do with just a drone. But hopefully we will get better technology and we could do something like that. It'd be pretty sweet.
Yeah, and if anybody wants to see a more thorough example of moose surveys, and how we do them in the interior. On our YouTube ADF&G YouTube channel, there's like a 5-minute video on there. It goes into more depth about exactly how the surveys are completed and what it takes in order to do them. I highly recommend watching that video. It will just explain it to you a lot more, and really you'll understand the magnitude of the space that's getting surveyed and estimated and stuff. So you should check that out. Okay, let's see. How much did the winter 2 years ago, I'm assuming that people are talking about the ice apocalypse winter, affect this study? And I don't think
Uh,
it did, because I don't think you started until after that ice event.
yeah. So yeah, it's hard to say if it impacted moose movements from our data. I know anecdotally, moose around town really don't like moving through that ice crust. But we don't have much, unfortunately, in this data set that can really get at that ice apocalypse winter.
Yeah, we did have it definitely have impacted the populations within a lens east, west, north, and south of Fairbanks. Like there was a reduction in populations significantly
Mhm.
in some of those, all the way to Delta, Unit 28 across to Canada. But how that affects things is not, yeah, certainly not known for this study. So
Yeah.
yeah, okay. How about does the age of the bull enter into the stats or the data that you're collecting?
Um, Kind of, yeah, a little bit. So we don't take a teeth from our captured bulls. That's the one way to verify an age of a bull moose or a moose in general. But we were taking, like you saw there, antler spread measurements. And my hope is to use that as a proxy for age. As bulls get older, their antlers grow bigger from a spike fork to a palm to a 50 plus. So using that as some sort of proxy to account for age in that section where I talked about, hopefully we can figure out what variables influence movement. That's kind of what I'm hoping to use that for. So yeah, it would be really
Okay.
cool to have some more accurate age estimates, but that's what we're working with right now.
So if you collared all age classes of moose over, and you're going to measure them every year, over time, you can get like a growth rate as well. Is that true?
Um, my understanding is you
An
get a
antler
something
growth
like
rate.
a growth rate. Antler width is something we don't fully understand. There's a lot of genetic components. There's also maybe nutritional components. So whether or not that growth rate would be consistent throughout time is a question, but it could at least inform us a little bit about what's going on for sure.
Okay. And you're collaring all age classes, are you?
Not calves,
Okay.
but yes.
Yeah, but okay, all antlers bulls though.
Mhm.
So, okay. All right, next question. In winter, are bull moose typically moving around more, covering more area to find food, for example, or staying in a smaller range to conserve energy?
That's a good question, and I think it's a really interesting answer. The answer is they are definitely, it seems, especially from our data that I've been able to see, restricting their movements. Moose, along with a lot of other ungulates, in the winter, this is especially true for white-tailed deer, really depress their metabolisms and kind of go into a weird low metabolism zombie state where they're just kind of walking around. But yeah, the answer is they depress their metabolism and conserve energy by staying in a small area relatively.
Okay. Next question. Okay, I don't think this is a question, a statement. Unfortunately, surveys are far in between in some areas, yes. Sometimes there are up to 6 years in the Unit 25 GMU. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, that's true. And again, if you kind of watch that video about moose surveys in Region 3, that explains that a little bit. There's no ability for Fish and Game to survey every game management unit every year. That's literally impossible, just by logistics. So in most of the areas that have the highest use are, getting surveys done more often. So in some areas, they don't get surveyed very often. And Fish and Game relies on other indices to kind of keep track of that population. Um, Okay, next, are there any issues with the callers transmitting the data, or is all the data coming in every day?
They're generally really good. Each caller tries to communicate with satellites or GPS, so they go to the satellite every day. Sometimes it doesn't always come through, but that data is then stored on the caller for the next time it tries. If it doesn't get that GPS signal for whatever reason, it'll hang on to it and try it again a little bit later. So we have been really lucky, and the technology is really good now, that we do get fixes almost every day.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Um, this one, I don't know, you could, is the warmer weather changing any known behaviors? Like bears are staying up later. Um, I
Mhm.
don't think that's, if you want to take a stab at that, I don't think it's related to your research per se, but,
Yeah,
you
I
know,
can jump a
okay,
little bit on it. I don't have I'm definitely not an expert in the relationship with weather and climate and that sort of stuff. I do know that moose generally don't move around as much when it's warmer, right? If it's a hot day, they're going to stay pretty sedentary. It is something we've thought about and are interested in looking into if anything is changing long term, but we just don't know right now.
okay. All right, a clarification, uh, about that. It's Snowmageddon. Just curious about whether
Mhm.
the lower population after the Snowmageddon would affect movements, et cetera. So there's,
Sure, yeah, it could be. Moose aren't outside of rut and bulls. Moose aren't very territorial, so they wouldn't be concerned about swooping up new territory or anything. They're much more driven by the environmental factors rather than the population. But it could be.
I mean, there's less competition for a food resource, but
Hmm.
whether that
Yeah,
changes their movements, I guess
yeah,
that's what, you would only know that by doing a research study. You'd
yeah.
only be
Which
able to
is
figure that out. It's a very
yeah,
difficult question to answer.
not hoping for another
Or
snowmageddon or anything, but
do browse
if we do, we'll
surveys
be
or
able to.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So no answer to that question really right now. Um, is there any indication of why one moose moves 62 kilometers and another 6 kilometers? Browse human activity in the area, et cetera. Any insights into that?
Uh, that's one of my big questions. That's what I'm going to be trying to figure out with those. What factors influence these movements? Was it a younger bull that moved much farther and an older bull stayed in? Was the one who stayed 6 kilometers did it have better forage all year and the other one had to go find better forage? At this point, we really don't know.
Yeah.
But we're
So
gonna hopefully find some pretty cool stuff.
like later on, if you're gonna do like vegetation overlays and stuff, you could
Hmm.
start looking
Yeah,
at habitat use and things like that, but that's down the
yeah.
road too.
Yeah, looking at habitat use, age characteristics, precipitation, and snow depth is one that I'm really interested in looking at. Yeah.
Okay. Um, all right. How about this one? Have you noticed patterns in elevations that most frequent during seasons, staying at higher elevations versus moving to flat and river valleys?
Anecdotally, we noticed a couple of guys or a couple of bull moose moved up in elevation when it got cold, but I haven't analyzed anything specifically to get something statistically significant about that in terms of what factors into movement. But anecdotally, we had a couple do that, so it definitely could be part of it, and it makes intuitive sense. You go up in elevation to get a little bit warmer.
Okay. Yeah, there are areas in Alpine that are like post-running aggregations and stuff too,
Mhm.
but I
Yeah.
don't know if those also occur at lower elevations. I don't know, but they're
Yeah.
definitely occur in higher elevations, but somebody
Yeah,
else
and
can chime in on that or
just thinking about this now, I remember reading that moose in general actually don't have a lower temperature threshold that their metabolism changes. So we've never recorded a temperature that a moose becomes uncomfortable at cold temperatures. Um, so at high temperatures, they definitely they stop moving, they do different things, their metabolism changes. But at colder temperatures, we don't have a temperature that's too cold for them. So yeah.
okay. All right, this is a tough question here. I don't know if you'll be able to handle this one, but how much wood could a moose chomp if a moose could chomp wood? All right,
It
we'll
depends on
skip
how
that one.
hungry he is.
Yeah, moose
Depends
don't
on how
chomp
long,
wood.
yeah,
Yeah,
how
well,
long
they
the
kind of
winter's
do
been
actually,
going.
but yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. Um, Good question though.
it's important.
The,
That's the kind of answers we're after doing studies like this.
yeah. Next question. Do you plan to expand your study area into other units?
Right now, there's no plan to expand. Obviously, as we move forward with this project, who knows what could happen. Me personally, I would love to, but it's not just a decision I make. But right now, there's no plans, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. Um, all right, just a comment. It would be good for bull moose to be studied like the cows are. It might be useful info for management, hunting seasons, etc. So it's
Yeah,
not really a
yeah,
question, but a comment. And you know,
make it
this
makes me
is
feel better.
Forrest is doing, pioneering some things, and um, there's a lot of reasons, to select, given limited resources to select cow moose because of the indices they give about populations, which are much greater than bull moose. But yeah, um, I
Yeah,
agree with unlimited resources. That would be ideal, but
yeah,
uh,
it is
managers are
very much
forced to
a
select priorities, really.
Yeah, it is very much a bang for your buck sort of thing with those cows. You get a ton of really useful information that managers use for a lot of different stuff. Whereas these bulls are a little bit more, you get information about them and that's kind of it. But I am glad that point was brought up because it validates me a little bit.
All right. Any more questions out there? Okay, let's see. Would you be willing to work with the locals of communities to help get other info? Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I am always open to talking to people. I'm trying to make myself more available and to talk about the sort of stuff, the interests that people have living around in these areas and kind of what they're seeing is definitely valid data for what we're doing. So yeah, 100%. And I don't know if Mike or Jen if they send out a follow-up email, but feel free to pass out my email
yeah,
and if anybody's got a something they want to talk about more or has an idea, feel free to shoot me an email and I'm happy to chat.
yeah, we can put your email in the, chat here. So, yeah, and then, and as you learn more, you're going to have a lot more knowledge
Hmm.
to discuss with people as well. So, yeah,
Yeah, and I'm really hopeful that once we have some of this stuff analyzed, we'll be able to do some outreach with it and show people
yeah,
what we found.
yeah. Okay, are the callers staying on past the study time length? And is there data collection if a moose were to die in the study?
Uh, so my project as a master's student is only I've only collected or I'm only using a year's worth of data, but the study itself as a whole will go on for as long as these collars last, and they can last 5 years, 7 years in a really nice scenario. So we're gonna have a really, really good data set in the next 5 to 7 years. And then question second part was about
If the moose dies, are you going to collect data on that?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So every time a moose dies, the collar sends up a different signal. It says, "Hey, this moose has stopped moving." And so we learn about that, we hear about it, and we try to get out there to see why it's the collar stopped moving. Often it's because the moose has died. We've had moose that have been consumed by bears. We don't know what it was killed by. We had one drown in the river. Um, but yeah, it's something we collect. These collars, these color data are also going to hopefully be used in the study looking at moose mortality to try to understand what's actually getting at these guys. So it's definitely data we collect. Yeah.
Yeah. And these moose are still huntable as well. So
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
theoretically, hunters can still shoot these
Mhm.
animals. That's part of the mortality, So,
Yeah, I will just
um,
really quick add on to that. Our hope with these collars is to not to alter hunter behavior at all. So if you were going to shoot the moose already and you saw it had a collar, take the shot still. If you weren't, don't shoot it because it has a collar. Because hunting mortality is for sure a sizable source of mortality for these guys. And if we change behavior interacting with these, that can change our study and what we end up answering. So if you do see one of these guys, treat it like you normally would. Let us know if you get one. That'd be great, but treat it like you normally would.
Yeah. And yeah, we want the collar back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. One more. Will the data set be available to the public?
The data set, no, unfortunately, will not be available to the public as far as I know. But I'm hoping to do a lot of outreach and presentations about what we're finding. So the answers will be.
Yeah, the answers, and if you publish, of course, that'll be available,
Yeah.
in a peer-reviewed paper. So, one way or another. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any more questions? I don't see any more questions popping in here. Give it a minute just for
Yeah.
any
Let me sweat a
moose
little bit.
managers out there that want to say anything. Take a minute to say something. Moose researchers, moose managers, we'll let you speak. Okay.
Get
Nobody's
me out of here
jumping forward.
before I get corrected.
Janet, yeah, I know. Janet Burrow, do we miss anything, or you think she needs to download during hunting season? And yeah, no, that's not possible, Tyrell. But good try though.
Yeah, always worth an ask.
We are not allowed to give out location data, exact location data. So yeah, but otherwise, yeah, thanks, Forrest. That was really informative. Very, very interesting. We got
Yeah, I saw Sarah had her hand up.
Burl had her hand up. Burl had their hand up here, and now it went down. So now it's back up. Burl? Okay. Burl's hand goes up and down. So, okay. Well, if there's no other questions and stuff, then we will go ahead and sign off. And thank you everybody for showing up. And yeah, don't miss the next presentations, and make sure you go onto our site and sign up for those automatic notices. And then keep following us on Facebook and Instagram, etc. Poll answer. He did the poll. The poll answer was
I can reiterate.
early November, or the answers to it. Yeah.
Yeah. The earliest we've recorded, like I said, the flight took place in the second week of November, so around November 14th, 13th. And moose had already dropped their antlers. So it's not inconceivable that we'd have moose dropping their antlers in early November, which is a lot earlier than kind of we really thought, which is a good early information to get from this.
Yeah, most people thought December.
So, and I think that's the conventional wisdom.
And there's a very wide range in antler drop time. So going into at least the end of January, maybe a little into February. So it's a pretty broad range.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. We're gonna go ahead and sign off, and thanks again, Forrest. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you guys.